The coronavirus pandemic is going about as you would expect considering the state of our government. The spread of the virus is now at more than 200,000 cases every day in the US, the worst it has ever been. I sort of remember when it was 40,000 and that was scary. Now 200 is sort of the new normal, and you know what you get when you're having 200,000 cases per day? You get record high deaths as well. And so the US on Wednesday set a new record for single day deaths from the coronavirus with 3,054. And we're expecting that when the COVID tracking project report comes out today, that it'll probably be above 3,000 as well. For perspective, and apparently it's necessary because the sheer fact that more than 3,000 Americans are dying every day by itself isn't enough to actually whip people into shape and take this seriously. That daily death total is more than the roughly 2,900 people who died on 9/11, or the roughly 2,400 people who died in the Pearl Harbor attack at the start of World War II. It's also more than the opening day of the invasion of Normandy, which is, I think we can all agree, generally used in cinema to show the most barbaric waste of life imaginable. We've surpassed that now, and it's likely that we're going to for a long time. So Francesca and Mark, that's the current state of things. What do you make of America and how it's dealt with this domestic crisis?
Well, it's funny that you established that context, and you're right. It's often established, these sort of other benchmarks of death, because somehow the seriousness of this, for some reason, and stay with me for a second, hasn't really landed. And simply by that, I mean, you still see people pushing back on it as a hoax, or with different strategies as to how the sort of overnight hatched medical profession feels we should strategize against this monstrous virus. So these attempts to put it in some kind of context of carnage are actually not a bad idea. One tires of them on one level because you feel as though, why do I have to do this? But on another level, I think it speaks to the seriousness of this and why in a perfect world and in the new year, you'd hope that we could get some degree of unity. But I suspect that's a faint hope at that.
I just want to know when it's okay to waterboard anti-maskers if it's a 9/11. Is that cool? Are they the terrorists? Because like I mean, I'm being facetious, obviously, but we're talking about, if this is being compared to when we were at war, still are BT dubs, then who are the terrorists in this case? I would argue it's the Trump administration. I would argue it's people who spread disinformation. I would argue it trickles down to people who aren't wearing masks and who spread lies and COVID in their communities. But of course, because it isn't a foreign enemy, as much as Trump tries to make it about China, we have no one to blame. And sadly, with all this military might, we have nothing inside. We are a shell of a country, zero infrastructure, hospital beds overwhelmed, nurses and doctors overwhelmed. So yeah, it is, and I'm curious as to how Biden is going to mobilize this country as if we were going to war, but against this virus and not, a foreign enemy.
And last thing on that, John, just on mobilizing this country, I think particularly now at this moment, and it speaks, I mean, if you could shoot it or you could bomb it, we'd have this virus under control, obviously. But since you do need to sort of unify a populace that is so divided right now, I don't have great hopes for Biden being a unifying figure. Now, again, I hope I'm wrong, but it just feels as though this moment in time is not about unity.
Yeah, and I hope he tries. I'm assuming that he will. And he is probably going to face incredible opposition from the Republican Party that will probably pretend to start to care about the death toll in roughly 53 days, but isn't going to do anything to actually help stop the deaths. So that's going to be fun. And so we talked about the historical context. Brett and I were talking about in the damage report this morning that we're about to hit the only remaining one, which is the Civil War. Beyond that, I don't think there's anything historical that compares to this. But let's also bear in mind that this isn't just a historical number of deaths. It also is establishing a fact that I think will last for a long time, off into future history, or what we call the future. And that is that there's 3,000 deaths a day, and we've hit about 300,000 already. And head of the CDC, Robert Redfield, said that the 3,000 deaths per day, we're gonna have that for probably a couple of months. And the Republicans are not going to care or criticize Donald Trump. So if you believe that in the future there is anything a Republican president could do that would lead to opposition from within his party, I don't know why you would maintain that belief. Like, remember when Obama was, doing drone strikes and things like that, and we were criticizing him? Yeah, that doesn't exist anymore from the other side. A 9/11 a day can die, and that's acceptable. That's acceptable. The only thing that needs to be spoken out against is suggesting that people put a bit of cloth on their face to stop some of that death. That is
never forget. That's all I have to say. Never forget. Never forget. We're always going to remember, and I think there should be statues of naked Donald Trump with a little placard over his woo, that just says never forget. All right, that's gonna be. We got war memorials. Let's have that. That's what I want in the future. But I think I am so fascinated with how Republicans continue to spin this, right? Because again, as we've talked about, it is such a painful exercise, but an important exercise to remember that if this were happening under a Democratic administration, oh my God, and it's these horrible little cynical political moves that we are forced to think about because the other side is so hyper partisan about something that is so basic, to think like, gee, I almost hope that they start to blame Biden for the pandemic because maybe that will mean they'll do something about it. Like that's what we're reduced to. Exactly.
And also reduced to looking for some good news, which we do have a little bit. For those of you who are hoping for the daily death numbers and case numbers to go down, we've sort of been crossing our fingers for the vaccine because our government has left us in the position where that is literally the only thing we have to look forward to. And there is a bit of good news on that, including a US government advisory panel just yesterday endorsing the widespread use of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine to help conquer the outbreak. Depending on how fast the FDA signs off on the panel's recommendations, shots could begin within days, inaugurating the biggest vaccination campaign in US history, which I'm sure will roll out smoothly without any anti-scientific opposition. But in any event, there was also developments on that today, including weird internal White House pressure apparently to do the authorization today, or else people need to lose their jobs. In any event, it is likely that the vaccinations will begin within just a few days. But bear in mind that while this is eventually a solution, this does not change for you. I'm talking to you who's watching this video. Your behavior doesn't get to change at all for right now. Just bear that in mind. And that's not just some YouTuber saying that. The head of the CDC says the reality is the vaccine approval this week's not going to really impact the numbers overall to any degree for the next 60 days. At the very least, we still have to be responsible and socially distance and wear masks and all of that.
Most of us are not going to get a vaccine until spring, maybe even early summer. I mean, depending on how the rollout goes. And as John says, I mean, there might be some hiccups along the way in the rollout. And it bears mentioning, we can discuss it in greater detail later, but it bears mentioning that, when you're threatening the FDA with firing unless they approve this vaccine, it does two things. First of all, it shows you're a mobster. I mean, it shows a mobster mentality out of the White House, which is really no surprise. But more importantly, in this context, is it runs down faith in the vaccine, right, in the scientific process. Because who wants to take a vaccine that was approved at gunpoint? It's a really tough spot for America right now, a country that already has such pushback on the vaccines. The numbers and the percentages are outrageous in terms of the number of people who are saying no to it. So all of this, I don't know. It doesn't portend great things for the spring and summer.
Right, but Bush, Obama, and Clinton are going to take the vaccine at the same time on national television, which I'm excited about because I'm excited to see how Bush gets out of it and swaps his vaccine out, because you know he's gonna do that. He's gonna be like, you first, but we all obviously we want it to be Bush first. I'm gonna say Bush, Clinton, and then Obama in that order.
Is that, can you bet on the order? I didn't know that. This all of a sudden I'm really interested. Where's Cenk when you need him on the order, the wagering on the order?
$20,000. Yeah. Anyway, that'll be coming up, and that's good. And that also, by the way, if you're wondering, once Trump is finally done with all these legal challenges and everything, what is Fox going to do? Well, they're going to have stuff to do. They are going to be opposed to that vaccine, and they're certainly going to be opposed to mask mandates and anything like that. So get ready. Their political identity has already been crafted, and they're going to be rolling that out on Inauguration Day.
Is this gonna be like the smoking, no smoking section, like just a period of the 80s and 90s where it was like, yeah, okay, if you're vaccinated, you go here. And if you're not vaccinated, you're outside. And yes, you have to eat out of this bowl. Maybe it was made for a dog, I don't know. But you look, there'll be a trough and you get your apps and your sides in the trough. Anyway, I'm hoping, I'm looking forward to the future is what I'm trying to say.
We'll have to see. I'm assuming there's probably going to be flights are probably going to be a little bit like whether there's sort of formal acknowledgement of that they would prefer that you be vaccinated. You're going to know that you are at least vaccinated, and your heart will go out to the people who refuse to, and their life will still be on the line. And for those who can't be vaccinated, you're still gonna be angry at the people who choose not to and thus continue to spread it even at lower numbers. And
also, as a practical matter, John, I mean, Francesca's been funny, but the truth is, if you've dealt even preliminarily with some of these things like travel or government or going into official offices, they ask you all these questions. I mean, you really have to run a gauntlet of, have you had a temperature? Have you had any symptoms of COVID-19? Anybody in your family had COVID-19? Do you know anybody? And that's going to actually expand to, have you had the vaccine? Have you had access to the vaccine? So there is going to be an evolution of this stuff that's going to put a premium on getting that vaccine.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.